My name is Duke, 34 years old, and founder of a tech company worth millions. I grew up with privilege in a wealthy family that seemed perfect from the outside. Until that Christmas party, when my dad dropped the bomb, all of our inheritance will go to Marco, my sister's husband. They thought I wouldn't survive without their money. 2 years later, they came crawling back desperate for help. Little did they know, I'd already set my plan in motion. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had family betray you. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. I was born into what most people would consider extreme privilege. The Hamilton estate in Boston's exclusive Beacon Hill neighborhood was my childhood home, a 5-bedroom colonial with manicured gardens and a view of the Charles River. My father Richard built his real estate empire from a modest inheritance, turning millions into hundreds of millions through aggressive development projects across New England. My mother Elaine came from old money. Her family had banking connections dating back to the 19th century. From the outside, we had everything. But inside our perfectly decorated home, the emotional dynamics were far from perfect. My sister Sophia, 3 years younger than me, was clearly the favorite from day one. While I was held to impossible standards, she received praise for minimal effort. I still remember bringing home straight, as in advanced classes, only to have my father glance at my report card and ask, "No extracurriculars." Meanwhile, Sophia would get B's and C's, and they'd take her out for ice cream to celebrate her. Improvement. When I won the state debate championship in junior year, my parents didn't even attend. They were at Sophia's dance recital, where she had a minor supporting role. "Duke, you need to focus more on practical skills," my father would say. "Academic achievements won't help you run a business." This was his constant refrain, despite the fact that I was also captain of the investment club that increased our portfolio value by 40% in 1 year. By senior year of high school, the pattern was firmly established. I was the disappointment despite objectively succeeding at everything I attempted. Sophia was the golden child who could do no wrong. When college applications came around, my parents made it clear they expected me to attend my father's alma mater and major in business. Instead, I chose computer science at Stanford. "You're throwing away your future," my father said when I told him. "That tech bubble is going to burst, and you'll come crawling back, asking to join the family business." My mother was more subtle but equally dismissive. "Darling, you've always been so different. I suppose you need to get this out of your system." I graduated with honors in computer science, with 3 patent applications already filed for software innovations I developed. My graduation ceremony was attended by my roommate's family, who cheered loudly when I crossed the stage. My own parents sent a gift card with a note, saying they were sorry they couldn't make it. Sophia had a minor outpatient procedure scheduled the same week. My early career was a series of 18-hour days and ramen noodle dinners. I started at mid-level tech companies, learning the industry and building connections while developing my own ideas at night. After 3 years, I had enough savings to quit and focus on my startup. I moved to San Francisco, found the cheapest apartment I could, and poured everything into building my company. During this time, I maintained a distant but cordial relationship with my family. I'd fly home for major holidays, endure the subtle and not-so-subtle digs about my career choice, and return to California more determined than ever to succeed on my own terms. It was during one of these holiday visits that Marco entered the picture. Sophia brought him to Thanksgiving dinner. A smooth-talking finance guy with perfect hair and an expensive watch. My parents were instantly charmed. "Now that's a man with a future," my father said loudly enough for me to hear from across the room. "He understands how real business works." I noticed things about Marco that my family didn't, or chose not to. The way his stories about his deals always lacked specific details. How his clients were never named. The inconsistencies in his background story. When I tried to point these out to my mother privately, she dismissed me immediately. "You've always been jealous of your sister's happiness," she said, shocking me, with her misread of our entire relationship. "Marco comes from an excellent family and has wonderful prospects. Not everyone wants to play with computers all day." Sophia and Marco's engagement came 6 months later, followed by a wedding that cost more than most people's houses. My parents covered every expense, from the 7-tier cake to the string quartet for the ceremony. I contributed financially as well, paying for the honeymoon as my gift, stretching my limited startup funds to give them a 2-week stay at a luxury resort in Bali. My contribution was barely acknowledged. At the rehearsal dinner, my father gave a 20-minute speech praising Marco as the son I never had, while I sat there wondering if he'd forgotten I existed. After the wedding, I returned to San Francisco with a new resolve. I would pour everything into my company. I would create success on my own terms. And someday I would make them regret every dismissive comment and missed opportunity to be supportive parents. The years after Sophia's wedding marked a turning point in both my professional life and family dynamics. My company Horizon Solutions began gaining traction in the tech industry. After nearly 2 years of bootstrap funding and countless pitch rejections, we finally secured our first major client, a Fortune 500 financial services firm that needed our specialized security software. That first contract allowed me to hire a team of 10 talented developers and move from my apartment office to a legitimate space in downtown San Francisco. It wasn't fancy, just an open floor plan with exposed brick and secondhand furniture, but it was ours. I remember the day we moved in, setting up my desk near the window overlooking the busy street below, feeling like I was finally building something real. Our security protocol innovation caught the attention of several industry publications. TechCrunch featured us in an article about promising startups, and suddenly investor meetings became easier to secure. We were still small, but we were growing steadily, solving real problems with elegant solutions. Meanwhile, back on the East Coast, Sophia and Marco had settled into a lifestyle of luxury, fully funded by my parents. They purchased a 4-bedroom home in an exclusive suburb for the newlyweds as a starter house. Marco drove a new luxury car and claimed to be working on various investment deals, though he never seemed to have an actual office or regular work hours. Sophia shopped and attended charity luncheons, quickly fitting into the role of wealthy housewife. During our rare phone conversations, my mother would inevitably ask when I was going to settle down like your sister. The implication was clear. My focus on building a business was somehow a failure to grow up, while Sophia's dependence on our parents was the mature path. You know, Duke life isn't all about work, my mother would say. Sophia and Marco are talking about starting a family soon. Don't you want that? What they didn't know was that I had met someone. Rachel came into my life unexpectedly at an industry conference where she was representing her marketing firm. Brilliant, driven, and genuinely kind. She understood my ambition because she shared it. We started dating, and for the first time, I felt truly supported in my goals. When my parents finally visited San Francisco, their reaction to both my company and Rachel was lukewarm at best. My father walked through our office, noting the lack of corner offices and expensive art. "It's quaint," he said in the same tone someone might use to describe a child's crayon drawing. "How many people work in this one room?" Rachel organized a lovely dinner at one of the city's best restaurants, making a point to learn my parents' preferences beforehand. My mother spent most of the evening talking about Marco's latest business venture, something vague involving real estate development, while barely asking Rachel anything about herself. The real breakthrough for Horizon Solutions came when we secured our first round of serious investment funding, $7 million of venture capital to expand our operations and develop new security protocols. We celebrated as a team, popping champagne in the office and taking everyone out for dinner. I called my parents to share the news, only to have my father respond with, "That sounds nice, son, but real estate is always the safer investment. Marco just closed a deal that's going to triple its value in 5 years." The pattern continued. Any success I achieved was minimized while Sophia and Marco's lifestyle was glorified. What became increasingly clear, though, was that Marco had started making questionable financial decisions. He began calling me directly, asking for loans for various business opportunities. "It's a sure thing," he would say. "I just need some liquid capital for the next 30 days. I'll pay you back with interest." I always refused, which created tension with my family. My parents started suggesting that I should help my sister and brother-in-law financially. "Family supports family," my mother said during one particularly tense phone call. "You have all this money now, and your sister needs help with their investment portfolio. What they didn't understand was that I was still reinvesting almost everything back into the company. Yes, we had funding, but we were at a critical growth stage. I was working 80-hour weeks, sleeping on the office couch some nights, doing whatever it took to build something sustainable. That Thanksgiving, I flew back to Boston with Rachel. The family dinner was predictably uncomfortable. My parents fawned over Marco, who bragged about various real estate investments that sounded increasingly suspicious to my trained ear. I noticed tension between my parents when financial topics came up, subtle glances, and subject changes that seemed out of character for them. When my mother gave us a tour of some recent home renovations, I noticed that several family artworks were missing. When I asked about them, she quickly changed the subject. Later, I overheard my father arguing with someone on the phone about extension terms and interest rates, language I recognized from my business dealings with investors. Something was wrong with their finances, but they were hiding it. Meanwhile, Marco continued to boast about his business acumen while drinking my father's expensive scotch. As we were leaving, my mother pressed an envelope into my hand, an invitation to the family Christmas gathering at the estate. "Please come," she said, with an intensity that seemed odd. "Your father wants the whole family together this year. It's important." Little did I know just how important that Christmas would be, or how it would change everything. Rachel and I arrived at my parents' estate on December 23rd. The grand New England mansion looked like something from a holiday card. Lights twinkling along the roofline, massive wreaths on the double front doors, and fresh snow covering the expansive grounds. As our rental car crunched up the gravel driveway, I felt the familiar mixture of nostalgia and dread that these family gatherings always evoked. "It's going to be fine," Rachel reassured me, squeezing my hand. "We're only here for 2 days." The housekeeper answered the door, ushering us into the marble-floored foyer, where the 20-foot Christmas tree dominated the space, decorated in the same silver and blue theme my mother had insisted on since I was a child. Family photos lined the staircase. I noticed there were several new ones of Sophia and Marco, but none from my company launch or any recent achievements. My mother emerged from the sitting room, air-kissing my cheeks, and embracing Rachel with practiced politeness. "You've arrived just in time for drinks before dinner," she said, leading us into the formal living room where the rest of the family was gathered. My father stood by the fireplace, tumbler of scotch already in hand. He gave me a firm handshake and a pat on the shoulder, the most physical affection he ever showed. Sophia sat on the velvet sofa, showing off a stunning new diamond bracelet that she mentioned was an early Christmas gift from our parents. Marco worked the room with his usual charm, backslapping my father and complimenting my mother's holiday decorations. He greeted me with excessive friendliness. "Duke the tech genius. How's life in Silicon Valley treating you? Still changing the world, one bite at a time." His tone carried the subtle condescension I'd grown accustomed to, as if my work was a cute hobby rather than a serious business. I maintained my composure, answering questions about Horizon Solutions with modest confidence. Nobody seemed particularly interested, quickly steering the conversation back to local country club gossip and Sophia's plans to redecorate their home. Later that evening, we exchanged gifts. I had spent weeks selecting thoughtful presents, a first edition book of poetry. My mother had once mentioned loving a vintage watch for my father, similar to one his grandfather had owned, and a carefully curated selection of local Santa Fe, Francisco artisan products for Sophia and Marco. They were barely acknowledged. "How nice," my mother said, setting the book aside without opening it. My father tried on the watch, noted it wasn't quite like his grandfather's after all, and took it off. In contrast, Marco's gift to my father, an apparently rare bottle of scotch, received effusive praise. Throughout dinner, I noticed my father drinking more heavily than usual, and my mother's smile growing increasingly strained. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia had joined us, along with my mother's sister Charlotte and her husband. The conversation stayed superficial, but there was an underlying tension I couldn't quite identify. After the elaborate meal, my father stood up, tapping his crystal glass with a silver spoon. "I'd like everyone to join me in the living room. I have an announcement to make." We gathered as requested, finding seats among the expensive furniture. My father positioned himself in front of the fireplace, the portrait of himself and my grandfather hanging above the mantel behind him. As some of you know, he began, I've had some health concerns recently. This was news to me, and I glanced at Rachel, who looked equally surprised. Nothing serious, he continued, but enough to make me consider the future of our family and our legacy. My father took another long sip of his scotch before continuing. After careful consideration and many discussions, Elaine and I have made some decisions about our estate planning. The room grew quiet. Even Marco stopped his constant fidgeting. The Hamilton real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and family trusts will all be consolidated. My father paused, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling somewhere above my head. And all of our inheritance will go to Marco. I felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Surely I had misheard. Marco has demonstrated exceptional business acumen, my father continued. He will manage the family businesses and estate going forward, ensuring the Hamilton legacy continues for generations. My father finally looked directly at me. Duke, you've chosen your own path and created your own success. You have your company and your life in California. You don't need the inheritance. Marco will ensure Sophia is well taken care of and the family business remains intact. Rachel's hand found mine squeezing tightly. I maintained a neutral expression while processing this complete betrayal. Marco's face showed practiced humility, but I caught the flash of triumph in his eyes. Sophia looked smugly satisfied, leaning against her husband with a proprietary air. The extended family shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Charlotte looked openly shocked while Uncle Robert studied his whiskey glass with sudden fascination. After a moment of stunned silence, I spoke, keeping my voice level. May I ask what prompted this decision beyond my geographic location? My father's explanation was as weak as it was insulting. Marco understands our business in a way you never have, Duke. He has the right temperament and connections to take the Hamilton holdings to the next level. And what about the fact that I've built a multi-million-dollar technology company from nothing? I asked calmly. That's exactly my point. My father replied, missing mine entirely. You've created your own success. You don't need our help. Throughout this exchange, my mother sat rigidly beside my father, avoiding eye contact with me. Her silence was as hurtful as my father's words. I see, I said finally. Thank you for clarifying your position. With as much dignity as I could muster, I excused myself from the room. Rachel followed me upstairs to the guest bedroom where we were staying. As soon as the door closed behind us, she exploded. That was the most outrageous thing I've ever witnessed. How can they just disinherit you like that? And for Marco, of all people, the man has never held a real job. I sat on the edge of the bed, surprisingly calm considering what had just happened. They've made their choice, I said quietly. We should talk to an attorney, Rachel insisted. There must be some way to challenge this. I shook my head. I'm not going to fight them for money I never earned. If they want to give everything to Marco, that's their decision. It's not about the money, Rachel argued. It's about the disrespect, the complete dismissal of everything you've accomplished. She was right, of course. It wasn't about the inheritance itself. It was what it represented. A lifetime of being considered second best, despite all evidence to the contrary. We left early the next morning, declining my mother's invitation to stay for Christmas Day festivities. As our car pulled away from the estate, I made a phone call to my lawyer. Not to fight for the inheritance, but to prepare for what I suspected was coming. Stephen, it's Duke Hamilton. Sorry to bother you on Christmas morning, but I need some information about family business liabilities. How exposed would I be if my parents' company faced financial troubles? Rachel looked at me questioningly. Just taking precautions, I told her after ending the call. I have a feeling we haven't heard the last of this situation. I was right, but not even I could have predicted just how dramatically things would unfold. After returning to San Francisco, I threw myself into work with renewed focus. The Christmas betrayal had severed whatever emotional ties still bound me to my parents' approval. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. Free to pursue success on my own terms without the shadow of family expectations. My first step was meeting with my personal attorney to understand exactly where I stood legally. As I suspected, my parents had every right to distribute their assets however they chose. There was no legal recourse, nor did I want one. What I wanted was information. I need to understand what might be happening with Hamilton Enterprises, I explained to Stephen, my lawyer. Not to interfere, but to protect myself. Stephen, who had connections in Boston's business community, agreed to make discreet inquiries. Meanwhile, Rachel and I regrouped at our apartment, strategizing my next business moves. This might sound strange, I told her, but I feel like that Christmas announcement was the best thing that could have happened. I've spent my entire life seeking validation I'm never going to get. Now I can stop trying. She understood, as she always did. So, what's next for Horizon Solutions? What came next exceeded even my ambitious expectations. The security protocol we'd been developing for financial institutions was completed in February, and the industry response was overwhelming. 3 major banks signed licensing agreements within weeks of each other. Tech publications ran features on our innovative approach to data protection. Suddenly, Horizon Solutions was the hot new company that everyone in the industry was talking about. Our team expanded from 10 employees to 50 then, to over 100 by summer. We moved into a proper office building in downtown San Francisco, 3 floors of open collaborative space, with views of the bay. Our valuation skyrocketed as venture capital firms competed to invest in our next funding round. Throughout this period of explosive growth, I maintained minimal contact with my family. I sent formal birthday cards to my parents and Sophia, but declined invitations to family events. When my mother called to ask why I wasn't coming to Easter, I politely explained that I was too busy with work commitments. But family comes first, Duke, she insisted. Does it? I replied, simply before changing the subject. Meanwhile, I was quietly gathering intelligence about Hamilton Enterprises and Marco's activities. Stephen's contacts in Boston provided valuable insights. The family company had leveraged several properties for a series of increasingly risky investments, all spearheaded by Marco with my father's blessing. I also cultivated relationships with financial journalists who covered real estate markets. During one dinner with a respected Wall Street Journal reporter, I carefully steered the conversation toward East Coast development trends. I've heard some interesting things about over-leveraging in the Boston luxury market, the reporter mentioned. A few major players seem to be extending themselves beyond rational limits. Anyone specific? I asked casually. Can't name names off the record, but one old money operation has been raising eyebrows. Traditional family business suddenly making aggressive moves that seem out of character. I didn't need him to specify further. The pieces were falling into place. I made the calculated decision not to warn my family about what I was learning. They had made their choice at Christmas. Marco was their trusted financial genius, not me. Besides, my warnings would likely be dismissed as jealousy or sour grapes. Instead, I focused on positioning Horizon Solutions for maximum growth and stability. We diversified our product offerings, moving beyond financial security to healthcare, data protection, and government contract work. I hired the best people I could find, creating a corporate culture of innovation and collaboration that attracted top talent. During this period, Rachel and I grew closer than ever. She left her marketing firm to join Horizon as our chief marketing officer, bringing her considerable talents to help shape our public image. We were partners in every sense, supporting each other through 16-hour workdays and celebrating small victories along the way. In August, I received a curious email from Harold Phillips, my parents' personal attorney for over 20 years. He was visiting San Francisco for a conference and suggested we meet for coffee. Intrigued, I agreed. Harold was careful with his words during our meeting at a quiet cafe near the Embarcadero. Your parents didn't send me, he clarified immediately. This is just 2 old acquaintances catching up. But as our conversation progressed, he dropped concerning hints about the family business. Richard has always been somewhat aggressive in his business approach, Harold said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. But lately, the decisions have been uncharacteristically high risk. Marco's influence, I suggested. Harold didn't confirm directly, but gave me a significant look. Your father isn't as young as he once was. Sometimes new voices can be very persuasive, especially when they tell you exactly what you want to hear. I left that meeting with my suspicions confirmed. Hamilton Enterprises was in trouble. Though the extent wasn't yet clear, I instructed my financial team to set up anonymous monitoring of the family company's publicly available financial information and stock performance. As summer turned to fall, Horizon Solutions reached a major milestone. Our data security system prevented a significant hack attempt at one of the largest banks in America, saving them potentially billions in liability. The success story made national news with my name and company mentioned in mainstream publications beyond just tech media. We celebrated the victory with an all-company party on the roof deck of our building. Under the stars with the San Francisco skyline glittering around us, I took a moment to truly appreciate how far we'd come. It was that night, surrounded by the team we'd built, that I asked Rachel to marry me. I'd planned an elaborate proposal for months, a private dinner overlooking the bay, a string quartet, the works. But in that moment of genuine happiness and accomplishment, I couldn't wait. "Yes," she said immediately, laughing, as I slipped the ring on her finger while our employees cheered around us. We decided on a small wedding, just close friends and Rachel's family. I didn't invite my parents or Sophia, a decision that brought a mixture of sadness and relief. We were married in a beautiful ceremony at a vineyard in Napa Valley, surrounded by people who genuinely supported us. 2 weeks after our wedding, I received an invitation from my cousin James to his daughter's college graduation party. James had always been kind to me, remaining neutral in family dynamics. At the bottom of the invitation, he'd handwritten, "Hope you can make it. Lots of family changes happening. Would be good to catch up." My curiosity piqued. I called James directly. After exchanging pleasantries, I asked about the family changes he'd mentioned. "I assumed you knew," he said, sounding surprised. "Your parents have been selling properties. The summer house in Newport went first, then the ski lodge in Vermont. There's talk they might even sell the main estate." "Financial issues?" I asked directly. James lowered his voice, though we were on a private call. "No one's saying it outright, but it seems like some investments didn't pan out. Your father looks stressed whenever I see him, and your mother has resigned from 3 charity boards. And Marco, well, he's not around as much as he used to be." After this conversation, I instructed my team to accelerate our expansion plans. If my intuition was correct, I needed to be prepared for what was coming. Sure enough, the following week, financial news outlets reported that Hamilton Enterprises stock had dropped 15% after a quarterly report showed significant losses. The company issued a statement about restructuring and realigning investment priorities. Corporate speak for trouble. I read the news article alone in my office, feeling no satisfaction, just the calm certainty that I had been right all along. The foundation of my parents' empire was crumbling, and Marco was holding the wrecking ball. 2 years passed since that fateful Christmas announcement. The tech world can change dramatically in that time frame, and Horizon Solutions rode the wave of innovation to become a major player in the cybersecurity space. Our company valuation had climbed to over $300 million, with industry analysts predicting continued growth as data security became increasingly critical to global businesses. Despite our success, Rachel and I maintained a relatively modest lifestyle. We purchased a beautiful but not ostentatious home in Marin County, with spectacular views and enough space to eventually start a family. We focused on building our life together, taking occasional vacations when work allowed, and reinvesting most of our profits back into the company. Our wedding had been exactly what we wanted: intimate, joyful, and surrounded by genuine support. Rachel's parents had embraced me as the son they never had, showing me what healthy family relationships could look like. We hosted regular dinner parties for our close friends and key team members, creating the warm, accepting environment I'd always craved. Professional recognition continued to accumulate. I was named to the prestigious 30 Under 40 list of influential tech leaders by Fortune magazine, complete with a profile that detailed Horizon's meteoric rise. The article mentioned my family background briefly, noting I had chosen a different path from the real estate development business established by his father. I didn't seek out information about my family, but news occasionally reached me through industry channels and distant relatives who stayed in touch. Hamilton Enterprises had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, restructuring debt, while attempting to maintain operations. The Boston Globe ran a feature on the decline of a real estate dynasty, which I read with clinical detachment. Most significantly, the family estate, the grand colonial home where I'd grown up, had been listed for sale with an asking price well below market value, suggesting urgency in liquidating assets. Then, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning, my assistant informed me that my mother was on the phone. "She says it's important," Jenny added, looking uncomfortable with the situation. I had made it clear that family calls weren't a priority. After a moment's hesitation, I took the call. "Hello, Mother." "Duke." Her voice carried none of its usual polished confidence. "It's good to hear your voice. It's been too long. What can I do for you?" I kept my tone professionally neutral. "I wanted to congratulate you on your company's success. We saw the article in Fortune. Your father and I are. We're very proud of what you've accomplished." The belated recognition might have meant something to me once. Now it just felt hollow. "Thank you," I replied simply. What followed was an awkward attempt at small talk, questions about San Francisco weather, comments about a mutual acquaintance, before my mother finally broached the real purpose of her call. "Things have been rather challenging here," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "The market has been quite unpredictable. Temporary setbacks, of course." I remained silent, neither offering sympathy nor asking for details. "Your father would love to see you if you're planning an East Coast trip anytime soon. Perhaps you could come for a weekend. It would mean so much to him." "I'm extremely busy with the company," I replied. "But please give him my regards." After ending the call, I sat quietly in my office, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. The desperate undertones in my mother's voice confirmed what I already knew. They were in serious financial trouble. A week later, my father called. It was the first direct contact he had initiated since the Christmas announcement 2 years ago. "Son, it's been too long." His voice sounded older, more strained than I remembered. "Your mother mentioned you're doing well with your tech venture. That's good to hear." Again, I kept my responses minimal, waiting for him to reveal the real purpose of the call. "I've been thinking about our last conversation," he continued, not specifying which one. Perhaps I was too hasty in some of my decisions. Business requires flexibility, as you know. When I didn't immediately respond, he pressed on. "I was wondering if you might be interested in discussing some potential collaborations. Your expertise in technology could be quite valuable to some restructuring we're doing." "I'm afraid my schedule is completely full for the foreseeable future," I replied calmly. "Horizon requires my full attention." Through my industry contacts, I'd learned the full extent of what had happened. Marco had convinced my father to leverage core family assets for a series of increasingly speculative investments. When the first few showed modest returns, they doubled down, putting everything into a massive mixed-use development project that ultimately failed spectacularly due to zoning issues, construction problems, and market downturns. Hamilton Enterprises had lost control of its flagship properties to creditors. My parents' personal assets were now being liquidated to cover guaranteed loans. And most telling of all, Marco had reportedly left Sofia and disappeared overseas after transferring substantial funds to accounts in countries without extradition treaties. Finally, the email I had been anticipating arrived. Subject line: Urgent family matter. From my father's personal address. The message was brief. "Duke, we need to speak in person about an urgent family situation. I can come to San Francisco at your convenience. Please let me know when you might have time to meet. Dad." I replied, suggesting a meeting at my office the following Monday at 10 a.m. Professional on my territory with clear boundaries. Monday morning arrived, and I watched from my office window as my parents emerged from a taxi in front of our building. Even from 12 stories up, I could see how diminished they appeared. My father, once commanding and confident, now stooped slightly. My mother, always impeccably styled, looked plain and tired. They were shown into our reception area, where they would have seen the wall displaying Horizon's major accomplishments, awards, patent certificates, and framed articles chronicling our success. My assistant escorted them to the main conference room where I met them. "Welcome to Horizon Solutions," I said, shaking their hands formally, as if they were any other business visitors. My father's eyes darted around the impressive space. The floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing panoramic city views, the state-of-the-art technology integrated throughout the room, the quiet hum of success that pervaded the entire floor. This is quite something, he said, genuine surprise in his voice. You've built all this? Yes, I replied, simply not elaborating on the years of 18-hour days, rejected pitches and perseverance that had gone into creating all this. We sat at the conference table, and I waited for them to speak first. Duke, my father, began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. We're in a difficult situation. I'm sure you've heard some things through business channels. Some, I acknowledged. Marco. My father paused, seemingly struggling with the admission. Marco made some investment decisions that didn't work out as planned. He convinced me to leverage core assets for expansion opportunities that ultimately failed. My mother interjected. We trusted him completely. He was family. Was I asked, though I already knew the answer? He left 6 weeks ago, my mother said, her voice hollow. Told Sophia he was going to New York for meetings. Instead, he went to Dubai and then disappeared. The bank discovered he had been transferring funds to private accounts for months. Sophia is devastated, my father added. She's alone with their 2 children, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. The house is being foreclosed on. I listened without comment as they outlined the extent of their financial collapse. Assets frozen, properties being sold off, legal actions from investors. They had moved from the family estate to a small condominium, the last property they owned outright. Finally, my father came to the point. We need a loan, he said bluntly, to save what's left and provide for Sophia and the children. How much, I asked, my voice neutral. The figure my father named was substantial, enough to rescue their core business holdings and provide short-term stability. It was also an amount I could now comfortably lend, which they obviously knew from Horizon's public valuation. Before I consider this request, I said carefully, I'd like to revisit our last family gathering, the Christmas where you announced that all of our inheritance will go to Marco. Do you remember your reasoning? My father shifted uncomfortably. That was a different situation. Marco showed great promise. Marco showed you what you wanted to see, I interrupted, just as you've only ever seen what you wanted to see in me. That's not fair, my mother protested weakly. Isn't it, I countered. You dismissed my achievements my entire life. You chose Marco, a man you barely knew, over your own son who had demonstrated actual success. We were trying to secure the family legacy, my father argued. No, I said firmly. You were choosing the son you wished you had over the one you actually got. My father's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. If this is about getting revenge by refusing to help us, this isn't about revenge, I cut him off. This is about choices and consequences. I knew about Marco's schemes months before they collapsed. I could have warned you, but you had made it very clear that my business judgment wasn't valued. The shock on their faces confirmed they'd never considered I might have had information that could have saved them. You knew, my mother whispered. I had strong indications, I clarified, through industry connections and financial analysts who monitor such things. But why would I interfere with the business genius you had chosen to manage the family fortune? My father seemed to age years before my eyes, as the full weight of their choices settled on him. So you're refusing to help, he concluded bitterly. I didn't say that, I replied, but I needed you to understand exactly where we stand before we discuss any financial arrangements. I asked my assistant to show my parents out, telling them I would consider their request and be in touch within the week. As the door closed behind them, I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a sad confirmation of what I had always known about our relationship. That evening, I sat with Rachel on the deck of our Marin County home, watching the sunset over the hills as I recounted the meeting with my parents. I expected to feel something more, I admitted, swirling the wine in my glass. Vindication, maybe, but seeing them so diminished just felt empty. Rachel considered this thoughtfully. What are you going to do about their loan request? Professionally speaking, it's a terrible investment, I said. They're over-leveraged, facing multiple lawsuits, and have demonstrated poor business judgment. But this isn't just business, Rachel pointed out gently. She was right, of course. Despite everything, these were still my parents. And somewhere in the mix was my sister Sophia and her children, innocent parties in Marco's schemes. What about Sophia? Rachel asked, seemingly reading my thoughts. And your niece and nephew, They're victims too. I hadn't seen my sister's children, my niece Emma and nephew James, since they were born. Sophia had sent formal birth announcements, but hadn't invited me to visit. Now these children were facing instability through no fault of their own. I need more information before making any decisions, I concluded. The next morning, I met with my financial advisor and legal team to understand exactly what had happened to the family fortune and what my options might be. Based on public filings and your parents' disclosures, Hamilton Enterprises is essentially hollowed out, my financial advisor explained. Marco executed a classic pump and dump strategy, creating the appearance of success while extracting liquid assets. The company structure is now mostly debt with few performing assets. What about criminal charges, I asked. Local authorities have opened an investigation, my lawyer confirmed. But Marco appears to be in Singapore now, a jurisdiction with complex extradition procedures. He was careful to have your father sign off on all major transactions, creating a paper trail suggesting everything was authorized. And Sophia. The children. Your sister is currently living in a small apartment in Somerville. No employment we could find. The children are 3 and 1. The family home is in foreclosure proceedings. This information left me with difficult choices. I could simply refuse to help letting my parents face the consequences of their decisions. I could offer a partial bailout with strings attached. Or I could step in completely, essentially purchasing what remained of Hamilton Enterprises. That afternoon, without informing my parents, I flew to Boston. I wanted to see the situation firsthand, particularly my sister's circumstances. The apartment building in Somerville was a far cry from the luxury Sophia had always known. 3 stories, brick exterior, functional but plain. I knocked on apartment 207 and waited. When Sophia opened the door, the shock on her face was immediately apparent. "Duke, what are you doing here?" She looked exhausted, hair pulled back carelessly, no makeup, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater. Behind her, I could see a modestly furnished living room where a little girl was playing with blocks on the carpet. "May I come in?" I asked simply. She stepped aside wordlessly, allowing me to enter the small apartment. It was clean, but cramped with toys scattered across the floor and laundry piled on one end of the sofa. "That's Emma," Sophia said, nodding toward the little girl, who looked up curiously. "James is napping." "She's beautiful," I said, and meant it. My niece had Sophia's eyes, and a serious expression as she studied me. "Mom and Dad sent you?" Sophia stated, not a question. "No. They don't know I'm here. I wanted to see you directly." She laughed bitterly. "To gloat, see how the mighty have fallen." "No," I replied calmly. "To understand the full situation before making any decisions." Sophia's composure cracked then. "What is there to understand? Marco lied to everyone. He stole our money, ruined Dad's company, and left me alone with 2 children and no resources. Is that what you wanted to hear?" "I never wanted any of this to happen," I said truthfully. "Despite everything, you're still my sister." She sank down onto the sofa, suddenly looking defeated. "Did you know about Marco? Everyone says you're so smart with business. Did you see this coming?" I considered lying to spare her feelings, but decided honesty was more important. I had suspicions. His investment strategies showed classic red flags. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, voice small. "Would you have believed me?" I countered gently. "Would Mom and Dad?" The look on her face answered my question. "No," she admitted. "We all thought he was brilliant. Dad treated him like the son he always wanted." The painful truth hung in the air between us. "I supported them disinheriting you," she continued, surprising me with her candor. "I thought you didn't need it, that you had your California life and your company, and I was jealous, I think. You were creating your own success while I was just living off Mom and Dad." Her honesty was unexpected and seemingly genuine. For the first time in our adult lives, Sophia was speaking to me without pretense or competition. "The children shouldn't suffer for any of this," I said after a moment. "Neither should you, regardless of past decisions." "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I've never had a real job. My degree in art history isn't exactly opening doors. I can barely afford daycare to go on interviews." We talked for nearly 2 hours more openly than we had in our entire lives. Sophia detailed Marco's deception, how he had charmed everyone, while systematically looting the family resources. She acknowledged her part in the dynamic that had always existed between us, the favoritism she had benefited from, and sometimes encouraged. As I was preparing to leave, she asked the question that clearly weighed on her. "Are you going to help Mom and Dad?" "I haven't decided yet," I answered honestly. "But I will help you and the children, regardless of what I decide about the business." Back in San Francisco, I spent several days consulting with my team and reflecting on my options. Rachel provided invaluable perspective, helping me separate emotional reactions from rational decisions. "You have the opportunity to break the cycle," she pointed out, "not by punishing them, but by showing a different way forward." After much consideration, I developed a plan that I felt addressed both the business and family aspects of the situation. I arranged for a trust fund to be established for my niece and nephew's education and future needs. I contacted a friend who ran a marketing agency in Boston, securing an interview for Sophia, who had shown surprising insight during our conversation. The most difficult decision concerned my parents and the family business. After reviewing all the financial information, I concluded that Hamilton Enterprises in its current form wasn't salvageable. Too much debt, too many bad investments, too much damage to the brand. However, certain individual properties still held value if properly managed. 6 days after their visit to my office, I flew to Boston again, this time to meet my parents at their condominium. The modest 2-bedroom unit, in a building that had once been owned by Hamilton Enterprises, was a stark contrast to the family estate where I'd grown up. My mother opened the door, surprise and hope briefly flashing across her face. "Duke, we weren't expecting you." The living room was furnished with pieces I recognized from the estate, now crowded into a space a fraction of the size. My father sat in his favorite leather chair, looking older and diminished in the smaller setting. "I've reviewed your situation," I began without preamble, "and I've made some decisions." They listened silently as I outlined my approach. I would not provide a loan to rescue Hamilton Enterprises in its current form. Instead, I would establish a new separate company to acquire the 3 most viable properties from the failing business. This would provide enough capital to settle the most pressing debts and prevent complete collapse. "I've already arranged for Sophia and the children to receive support," I continued. "A trust for the children's education and future, and assistance for Sophia to build her own career path." My father's face flushed with anger. "So, you're letting the family business die? After 4 generations?" "The business was effectively dead the moment you gave Marco control," I replied evenly. "I'm salvaging what can be salvaged." "And us?" my mother asked quietly. "What about your father and me?" "That depends on you," I said. "I'm willing to provide modest financial support with conditions. First, acknowledgement of the real dynamic that has always existed in this family. Second, respect for boundaries I'll establish going forward. Third, no further contact with Marco should he reappear." My father started to protest, but my mother laid a restraining hand on his arm. "What exactly are you asking us to acknowledge, Duke?" she asked carefully. "The favoritism toward Sophia throughout our lives, the dismissal of my accomplishments, the choice to trust a near stranger over your own son, the fundamental lack of respect you've shown me, despite my demonstrable success." The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unspoken truths. Finally, my father spoke, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "I wanted you to follow the path I had laid out," he admitted. "When you chose differently, I took it as rejection. Perhaps I couldn't see past my own expectations to recognize what you were actually building." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement, but it was more self-awareness than I had ever heard from him. "Consider my offer," I said, rising to leave. "It's the best I can do under the circumstances." As I reached the door, my mother called after me. "The children, Emma and James. Will we be allowed to see them?" "That's not my decision," I replied. "That's between you and Sophia. But I would suggest approaching that relationship differently than you did with me." I left them to consider their options, knowing the terms I'd offered were fair but firm. The ball was in their court now. 6 months later, Rachel and I welcomed our son Michael into the world. Holding him in the hospital, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger, I experienced a profound shift in perspective. The business achievements, the family drama, the old wounds, all seemed to recede in importance compared to this new life we had created. "He has your eyes," Rachel said, softly watching us from her hospital bed. "Poor kid," I joked, but secretly hoped he had inherited more of my wife's traits than mine. Fatherhood changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The protective instinct was overwhelming, as was the desire to create a family environment completely different from the one I had known. I wanted Michael to grow up feeling unconditionally loved and supported, his accomplishments celebrated rather than measured against impossible standards. Horizon Solutions continued to thrive, though I had implemented new policies allowing for better work-life balance for all employees, myself included. We had expanded to 3 international offices and were in preliminary talks about a public offering. The company valuation had passed $500 million, though financial success had taken on a different meaning for me now. My relationship with Sophia had undergone remarkable transformation. After securing the marketing position I'd recommended her for, she discovered a natural talent for client relations and creative direction. Her boss reported that she was their most promising new hire in years. More importantly, Sophia and I were building a genuine sibling relationship for the first time in our lives. One Sunday evening, Sophia brought Emma and James to our home for dinner. Watching the children play in our backyard, while Rachel and Sophia chatted by the grill, I felt a sense of peace I'd never expected to find with my family. "They're asking about you again," Sophia said quietly, when we had a moment alone. "Mom and Dad. They want to meet Michael." My parents had accepted the financial terms I'd offered, though our contact remained minimal. They had downsized further to a small house in a modest suburb, living on the limited income I provided, plus what remained of their personal savings. The former family estate was now a luxury boutique hotel, the only successful conversion of a Hamilton property I'd been able to achieve. "What do you think?" I asked Sophia, valuing her insight in a way I never had before. She considered carefully before answering. "They've changed, Duke. Losing everything. It's humbled them. Mom volunteers at a community center now. Dad's joined a men's group at the local church. They're different people." After discussing it with Rachel, we decided to invite my parents for Thanksgiving, the first family holiday we would host in our home. The invitation was specific: a one-day visit, no overnight stay, clear boundaries. When they arrived, the initial moments were awkward. My father, once commanding and imposing, seemed smaller, somehow more tentative. My mother had abandoned her designer wardrobe for simple slacks and a sweater, her jewelry modest and practical. "Thank you for inviting us," she said, handing Rachel a homemade pumpkin bread. "This means more than you know." The most profound moment came when they met Michael. My father's hands trembled slightly as he held his grandson for the first time, his expression a mixture of awe and regret. "He's perfect," my mother whispered gently, touching Michael's cheek. "You've created something wonderful here, Duke. All of this." She gestured to encompass our home, Rachel, the life we had built. During dinner, the conversation remained carefully polite, focusing on neutral topics. Afterward, while Rachel and Sophia cleared the table, I found myself alone with my father in the living room. "I was wrong about you," he said abruptly. "About everything, really." I waited, not filling the silence. "I spent my life building wealth, thinking that was the measure of success," he continued. "Now I have almost nothing, and I'm finally learning what actually matters." He looked toward the dining room, where laughter could be heard, as Rachel and Sophia entertained the children. "This, family. Not money, or status, or control. It took losing everything for you to see that," I observed, not unkindly. "Yes," he acknowledged simply. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Duke. Just the chance to be a grandfather to Michael. To do better with him than I did with you." It wasn't a complete healing. That would take much more time, if it ever came fully. But it was an honest beginning. As they prepared to leave that evening, my mother embraced me briefly. "We're proud of you," she said. "Not because of your company or your success, because of the man you've become, despite our failures as parents." In the months that followed, we established a new kind of family relationship. Carefully bounded, respectful of past wounds, but open to future possibilities. My parents visited once a month for Sunday lunch, gradually earning limited trust through consistent behavior rather than dramatic promises. The true wealth in my life, I realized, had nothing to do with inheritance or business valuations. It was found in the family we chose and created. Rachel, Michael, our close friends, the loyal team at Horizon. It was in the authentic connections that had survived or been forged through difficulty. Looking back on the journey from that Christmas betrayal to where I stood now, I recognized that the inheritance announcement had actually been a gift of sorts. It had freed me from seeking approval I would never receive. It had pushed me to define success on my own terms. Most importantly, it had shown me exactly who people were, allowing me to make informed choices about who deserved a place in my life going forward. One evening, as Rachel and I watched Michael sleeping in his crib, she asked me a question. Do you ever think about what would have happened if they hadn't given everything to Marco? If they'd treated you fairly from the beginning? I considered this carefully. I might never have built Horizon. I might have compromised more, stayed tethered to their expectations. I might not have met you. I took her hand. Sometimes, the worst betrayals lead to the best outcomes if you refuse to let them define you. The family business my father had valued above all else was gone, but something more valuable had emerged from its ashes. Authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or control. As I reflect on this journey, I wonder how many of you have faced similar family betrayals or disappointments. Have you found ways to rebuild on your own terms? The path from hurt to healing isn't about forgetting or pretending the past didn't happen. It's about building something new that honors your worth and values. If this story resonated with you, please share your experiences in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe if you found value in my journey. Your support helps more people find these stories of overcoming family challenges. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth isn't determined by others' inability to see it. You define your own success.